In this video, I'll be recreating this 3D scene inspired by Iman Gadzhi using a free program called Blender. If you're interested in mastering Blender, connecting with other like-minded individuals, or even landing some paid projects, check out the link below to join the top Blender community out there. It's led by me and Aryan3D, a close friend of mine and a fellow YouTube colleague who I work with daily. With that said, let's dive right into the video. First, when you open Blender, you're gonna see this scene setup right here. So we have a cube, we have a camera, and a point light right here. Now let me quickly tell you how to navigate inside Blender. If you hold the middle mouse button and you drag your mouse around, you're gonna be pivoting around an object. If you wanna be able to move freely, you're gonna do the same thing while holding shift. That way you can move around without having to pivot around an object. Now that we've covered the basic movement, let's actually start doing something. We're gonna click on this cube, press X, delete, and before I start adding any elements, I just wanted to tell you that I'm not gonna be using any complicated shortcuts. I'm gonna be using all the shortcuts that are default inside Blender, so anyone who just downloads the program right now can follow along this tutorial and recreate the same thing I did without any problems. Okay, now simply press Shift A, Mesh, and choose a plane right here. Now press S for scale and scale it up a bit. We can scale it up even more. Now we're gonna go up here and choose edit mode instead of object mode. You can also transition between the modes by hitting tab. Now choose this edge select mode, select these two faces, hit E on the keyboard. That's gonna enable this extrusion option, and we want to make the wall, so we're gonna extrude it along the Z axis. So press Z on the keyboard and I'll simply drag your mouse up until you're happy with the position and then confirm it with a click. And that's it. We have now successfully created our room. Now we have to add the rest of the objects into the scene. I'm gonna use a site called Sketchfab for that. It is a site where you can find 3D models online. Some are paid and some are free, so you can look around and see if there's something you like, and then simply download that and place that into Blender. I'm gonna search for a table with metal legs. As you can see in the reference, we have some kind of metallic table, a guy here, a PC with a keyboard, some shelves behind with these little objects, and a very dark environment. So to download this table, we're gonna click on it, click download 3D model, and download the FBX format. Also, you can use the GLB format, is gonna work as well. And now you can simply drag and drop this file into Blender, hit import, and now we're gonna see that this object is very massive. We can fix that by hitting S for scale and then scaling it down, do it even more. And now you can either use this move tool right here and manually move it around, or you can press G on your keyboard to use a shortcut, and now you're gonna be able to freely move it around. Now to limit the axis on which you're gonna move it on, you're gonna press X, Y, or Z. And since I want to move it to the right, I'm gonna press Y on my keyboard, move it along the Y axis, click to confirm, and now we're gonna hit R for rotation, hit Z on the keyboard to rotate it around the Z axis, and type 90 degrees. For you that are very new to Blender, if you find it hard to operate this way, you can also select the object, use the move tool right here, or simply use this object properties panel right here, and you can play around with any property in this panel. And I know you're probably asking yourself why the scene looks this weird, why it has no colors, it's all plain, it's all white and without any colors in it. It's because we're inside of the solid preview. But if we get the render preview, we're gonna see how the table has colors, and we're gonna see this light right here. That is essentially the way how our scene is going to look like once we export it. And also, one thing I want to point out to you is that there are multiple render engines in the program. The one we're using right now is Eevee. There's Workbench and Cycles. You're probably not going to use Workbench at all, so it's between Eevee and Cycles. Now when we switch to Cycles, we're going to see this weird noise around it, and it's because it takes a lot more time for your computer to process this scene, because Cycles is a much more sophisticated and render heavy engine. So once we're done with the whole scene, we're probably gonna render it in Cycles, but for now we're gonna use Eevee so it's easier to operate. Now enough with the technical stuff, let's import our main character into the scene. So I managed to find the same guy that Iman was actually using in his own video. So again, we're gonna click download and download the FBX file. Now just simply drag and drop the file into Blender, hit import FBX, and there it is. But before we do anything with him, I'm just gonna adjust this table so it fits properly. So select this part, hold shift and select the legs. Now hit this -X on this gizmo right here. Press G on the keyboard, Z, to move it along the Z axis, and now simply drag it down so it touches the floor. We can scale it down a little, and now we have our table. Now we're gonna select the guy, scale him up too, and now let's move this guy a bit closer to the table. Okay, and since our guy is floating in the air, we're gonna have to find him a chair that he can sit on. I'm actually gonna use a plugin called Blender Kit for that. I'm gonna leave you a link down in the description so you can download it too. Basically, it's a plugin inside Blender where you can search for any objects, make sure the free filter is turned on, and now we're gonna get a bunch of results of free objects that we can directly use in our scene. So for example, I'm gonna choose this one, I'm gonna drag it here, and here's the chair. Now we're gonna select it, scale it up. We can go here and type 0, that way it's gonna be rotated appropriately, and I'll change its position so it's under the guy. I'm gonna switch to rendered view so you guys can have a better understanding of what's actually going on in the scene. Just quickly gonna move this light here so you can see better. Later on we're gonna get rid of this light and actually create a better one, but for now let's simply use it so we can see the scene. Now I search for this Apple monitor. We're gonna drag and drop it into the scene. We're gonna hit S and scale it up a bit, move it a bit further back, and now I simply found this keyboard and this Apple mouse using the Blender Kit plugin. Now I'm gonna try to find a sofa similar to this one, and also some kind of shelves like these located behind the guy. So I went to Sketchfab again and found a sofa that looks somewhat similar. I'm just quickly gonna align it with the floor. I repeat, you can do it by clicking on this -X button right here, and then simply dragging it down to the floor. Now we can scale it up, hit R for rotation, hit Z to rotate it around the Z axis, and type in -90. Now simply drag it somewhere here, and for some reason it was still clipping through the floor, so I adjusted it once again. I'm just quickly gonna select this plane that we created, press S for scale and scale it up. We're gonna make it much bigger so we have a lot of space inside the room, so we can push this one a little bit further back. I also found this shelf on Sketchfab, so let's import it. Let's move it up a bit, align it with the floor, push it a little bit further back, and scale it up with S. Something like this should be fine. And now you're probably asking yourself why this shelf looks purple or pink. Well, honestly, I don't really know, but we're gonna fix that. So in this section of the video, I'm gonna show you how to add materials to different objects. That way we can get rid of this purple looking shelf color, and also we're gonna make the plane, aka the walls, very dark, so we can get that dark room vibe that Iman has in his video. So let's click on this shelf, go to the shading workspace, and now we're gonna see a bunch of different nodes right here. We're gonna delete most of them because we don't need them. So select these, select this one as well, and press X, and now as you can see the purple color has disappeared. Okay, so once we've got rid of this purple color, we can now make this shelf look a lot more natural by adding wood texture to it. I'm quickly gonna head over to this website called Ambient CG. Here you can find and search for a lot of different textures. So I found this texture that could work. You can always download multiple textures that you like and then test between them. So I'm gonna download the 2K PNG file. And now once we're back inside Blender, you're gonna select this principal BSDF node, hit Ctrl T, and that's gonna add 3 new nodes to our scene. If this didn't work for you, you're gonna have to enable the node wrangler. To do it, go to Edit, Preferences, and here search for Node Wrangler. Make sure this box is selected, and now you can repeat the same thing and have this node set up. So to add the textures, click open here. We're gonna find this floor that we downloaded and then choose the color map. We can now see that our shelf has the exact same wooden texture that we downloaded, but we don't exactly want to leave it like this. We're gonna do a little bit of adjustments. Of course you can change this any way that you like. This is just the way I want to do it, but you can always add different textures, change it to a different color. You can basically do anything with it that you like. And now in between the texture node and the BSDF node, you can do right click, add color, and add hue saturation value node. Now just place it between these two, and now you can play around with these settings to find the color that you want to use. Also, when you change these settings, you can hold shift so you can be more precise with the color that you want to choose. So I played around with these settings a little, and I think this looks fine. There's also one little thing that you can do. You can change this projection from flat to box, and now this object texture is gonna look weird. To fix that, you can go to this texture coordinate node and connect the object to vector, and now scale all of these X, Y, and Z axes to something like 0.01, and now this looks a lot better in my opinion. So once we're done with shading, now we can go back to our layout workspace. Now let's make these walls dark so we can make that dark room vibe. So select them, go to the shading workspace once again, and now we can add a material to it by hitting new here. And now hit on the base color, and we can drag this slider down until it gets really dark. Here in the material preview, we can play around with the rest of the settings, but first I'd like to switch our render engine from Eevee to Cycles. It's gonna load slower, but it's gonna look much nicer. Okay, so we can see that our scene is really dark, and by default there's gonna be an HDRI, or basically an outside natural source of light lighting up our scene. And that's good, but in this case we don't want that. because we're trying to achieve a look that the room is very dark and doesn't have any natural sources of lighting. So we'll go here and hit Object and switch that to World. Now we're gonna see that we have this background node, and make sure we switch the strength to 0. You're immediately gonna notice that there's less light in the room. If we cranked it far up, you would see that there's a lot of light coming, but we wanna have that to 0. Now the only light source that we have in the room is this point light right here, and we wanna get rid of this. So press X, delete. And now the room has gone completely dark because we don't have any source of light. To add a light, press Shift A, Light, Area. Now you can press G, Z, and pull it up. Click on this object data properties right here, and we can crank up its power right here. Now since we cranked its power up, we can see that our scene looks a lot better. It has a source of light now. You can always change the light strength or position later on, so you don't have to worry about that. Now let's play around with these walls texture settings. Make sure the metallic is all the way up, and now we can play around with this roughness slider. So if we put it to 0, we're gonna see that the floor is fully reflective, almost like some kind of glassy surface. And if we set the roughness to max value, it's not gonna reflect anything at all. So I'm gonna find something that works best for me, which is around 0.2, maybe a little less. And you can also play around with this alpha value. There's basically no rules. You can play around with the settings until you find something that works for you. Of course, once again, these settings are not final, so you can always adjust them later on. So once we have more or less set up the lighting and materials, let's add some elements to these shelves so it doesn't look so empty. So go back to the layout workspace, and let's switch to the solid preview so it's not so heavy on the computer. For example, let's search for a vase. I'm gonna take this one and place it here. Scale it up a bit with S. Now let's perhaps choose this one and place it here. We can now switch to the render preview to see how it looks. I think it looks pretty good. Let's for example add this flower pot down here. And in the meantime, I've also added some more elements to fill out the empty space. And as we can see, the scene looks pretty good now. We've added a table with all the equipment. We added some shelves behind, filled the empty space with some plants. We've also added a sofa right here, made the whole room environment dark, and also added a source of light. But there's one little thing that's still bothering me. And that is the fact that this guy looks slimy. And even though Iman's editors let him be slimy, I just think it looks weird and unnatural, so I'm gonna make sure to fix this. It is very easy. You just have to click on the guy, go to the shading workspace, and the only thing you have to do is to unplug this roughness map from the principal BSDF node. Now he's not slimy anymore and it looks much better. Now that we have sorted this out, let me show you how to create this text animation. And for that, we're gonna have to get inside After Effects. Once we're in, we're gonna create a new composition, 1920 by 1080. Click on the type tool and click on a screen and write your text. We're just gonna make it extra bold and let's center it out. To create a line under the text, we're gonna use the pen tool. So click approximately here and make sure you're holding shift and click on the other side. Let's make sure the line cap is round. And now we're gonna use the type tool again to write more text under the line. Let's add this puzzle piece to our scene. I simply searched for a puzzle piece on Google and found this one in PNG version and just downloaded it. So let's scale it down a bit, place it right here, scale it even more down. Let's go into the effects and presets tab and search for fill effect, drag and drop it onto our layer, and in the color menu choose the color white. Now I'd also add deep glow to each layer, so we're gonna do exactly that. So just drag it onto our text. Quick mention, Deep Glow is a paid plugin. If you can't get a hold of it, you can also use Glow instead, and you're gonna be just fine. And I simply change the radius to about 50 and exposure to 0.05. And I'm gonna copy the effect to every other layer. And the last thing left to do is to animate the whole text. First, let's select this one, go into animation presets, text, animate in, and double click on slide up by word effect. When we play the video now, you're gonna see how the text slides up from this position down here to the default one. And we don't exactly want that. We want it to slide down from this upper position. We're gonna change it by clicking on this arrow right here, open text, slide up by word, and instead of a positive number, we're gonna put, for example, -50. That way we're making sure the text slides down from above and not the other way around. To animate the puzzle piece, it's gonna be very easy. Click on it and make sure we change the anchor point position from here to here. So click on this tool and drag it here. The reason we're doing it is so we can rotate it exactly around that point. I'm actually gonna adjust it a bit so it's about here. And now we can select this layer, hit R for rotation, go a bit further, set a keyframe, go to the beginning and rotate it approximately like this. We can also select the keyframes, hit F9 to easy ease and turn motion blur on. We can also hit T for opacity, set a keyframe, put it to 0, go 1 frame forward, make it 100, again a frame forward, 0, and now repeat this process a few more times. I place them a little more further apart, and now when we play the video it looks something like this. To animate to a line, just click on this arrow, click add, and choose trim paths. Open it up, drag the end to 0, set a keyframe, go a bit further, and place it back to 100. You can select them again and press F9 to ease them. Go into the graph and make this curve approximately. And now when we play the video, it's gonna look like this. Let's add one more thing to this line. Open up shape, stroke, taper, and set the end length to 100%. That way the line is gonna be a lot thinner at the end. And the last thing left to do is to animate this text down here. We're gonna do it by searching for the effect called decoder fade in, drag it onto the text, press U to see all the active keyframes, select them, and move them forward. Now simply adjust them a bit so it fits the animation. And at the very end, we've got our text animation looking like this, exactly like it's supposed to. So to export it, we're gonna have to go to File, Export, add to Render Queue, and now we come to a really important step. Click here on the Output module and set the format to QuickTime. You can set the format options to animation and make sure the channels are set to RGB plus alpha. This alpha is gonna make sure that our background is transparent, and that is a key factor to making this thing work. Now hit OK, choose the output to where you want to save it, and hit render. Once we're back inside Blender, let's import the text that we just created. To do it, go to Add, Image, and select Mesh Plane. Then select your text and click Import Images. Just select Material Preview up here. That way we're not gonna have to be in Render Preview, so the scene gets really slow, but we're still gonna be able to see the text. Now we can select the Move tool, for example, drag it up. We can set the Z rotation to 0. Let's hit this -X here. Drag it all the way to here, so it's exactly above the screen. Let's push it a little bit down. And down here we're gonna see this timeline. We can drag it up, and if we play the animation we're gonna see our text appearing. And the only thing left to do now is to animate the scene. To do it, let's click here to View, Align View, and select Align Active Camera to View. And now you're gonna see these borders appear. And these borders are the borders of what the camera is actually gonna see. The animation inside of these borders is gonna get picked up and later displayed in the video. Everything outside of these borders is not gonna be visible. So this basically behaves like a camera you would have in real life. So let's select the camera up here, and now we're gonna see these borders get selected. Let's now adjust the camera's position. So we're gonna press G and then Z on the keyboard, and then drag it a bit down along the Z axis. And once we're done, we can click to confirm it. Now I'm gonna do the same thing but for the X axis. And now that I'm more or less happy with how it looks, we can start animating the camera. Before we do that, let's actually go to the camera settings, and let's select this depth of field option. There's a few options inside of this setting that we can play with. For example, we can set the focus object to this guy right here using this eyedropper tool, and now we can play around with the f-stop value. The lower this value is, the blurrier the background becomes, and the higher this value is, the sharper the background becomes. So now it is on you to play around with these settings a little until you come up with something that looks good for you. I'm gonna set it to around 2.5, and now we can animate the scene. We're gonna do it by making sure this playhead is at frame 0, then select these object properties, and now we're gonna set a keyframe for X location. Now I'll take the playhead and move it forward. I decided to put it at frame 210. The reason for that is because I want the animation to last approximately 7 seconds, and because our frame rate is set to 30 frames per second. If we multiply this number with 7 seconds, we're exactly gonna get these 210 frames right here. So now that we're here, we can press G on the keyboard, press X to move the camera along the X axis, and now just drag the camera until you're happy with its position, and click here to set another keyframe. Now make sure you select both of the keyframes, right click, interpolation mode, and set it to linear. And now just to demonstrate, I'm gonna switch to material preview. We can play the animation and see how the camera is now moving from one frame to another. But there's a little problem we're facing. If you pay attention to this text, you're gonna notice that we can't really see it, it's black. And the reason for that is because it is dependent on the light source above it, and we're gonna fix that. So make sure we select this text box, go to shading workspace, and now we are going to see these 3 nodes. To fix it, let's open a mission property on this principled BSDF node, take this color node and connect it to this bottom one, and now put the strength at about 1.5. That way, our text now doesn't depend on any other light source than itself. Now we can go back to our layout workspace, and we can now see that our text is no longer dark. Next, I would like to make sure that the text doesn't start to animate right away, but has a little offset to it. We can do it by going to the material properties, and we can hit this arrow next to this alpha option. First, you have to make sure the text box is selected, and now here you can choose an offset. For example, I want my text to start animating at around frame 80, so in the offset panel, I'm gonna type -80. That way this whole time the text is invisible until it hits frame 80, and that's when it starts animating. There's also one little thing that I'd like to fix. If you pay close attention to this guy, you're gonna notice that as I play the animation he's moving, but after a certain moment he stops moving. So if we select him, we are gonna see the keyframes where he's animated, and after this certain point there's no more keyframes, which means he's not gonna be animated anymore. We can easily fix that by hitting A. That is gonna select all of our keyframes, then hit Shift D. That's gonna duplicate the keyframes, and now you can simply paste them at the end. That way, he's gonna stay animated until the end of the video. And at the end, before we export the animation, we can play around with the lighting a bit. So I positioned mine a bit to the side and rotated it a bit so it's facing the guy directly. One thing that I wanna mention to you, if you pay attention to this shadow right here, and we scale the light up, you're gonna see that the shadow behind gets a lot softer. While on the other hand, if we scale the light down, you're gonna notice how the light gets much sharper. So it's up to you how you want to make it. Again, you just have to play around with it until you find something that looks good to you. To switch back to the camera view, you can hit this little icon right here, and now we can render out our scene. So if we get to the render properties, I'm gonna be using cycles as a render engine, and for render samples, I'm gonna put it at around 128. You can always render out one image before you render out the whole animation to see how it looks. You can do it by going up to render, render image, and now you can see a preview of how it's going to look. For the output properties, I would suggest 30 frames per second. Here you can choose your output folder to where you want your animation to be saved to. Make sure the file format is set to FFmpeg video, video codec to H.264, and output quality to perceptually lossless. Everything else you can leave as it is. You can also play around with the resolution. For example, if you don't need it to be a high resolution, you can lower it down, because the lower the resolution, the faster the render time is gonna be. Now to render out the animation, just go up here to render and click on render animation. And once it's done rendering, it's gonna be saved to your output folder that you set right here. And after rendering the first scene, now you'd have to go to After Effects again and create the second text animation. Then go to Add, Image, Mesh Plane, select it here and import it. Position the text to your desired position, press Shift A, add a new camera, make sure that new camera is selected, go to View, Cameras, and click on Set Active Object as Camera. That way this new camera is gonna become your new active camera. And now go to View again, Align View, and click Align Active Camera to View. Now position the camera to your desired location. Press G and double Z to move it along the local Z axis. Move it back. You can also press N to open this little menu right here. Now you can play around with the camera's rotation. And once you're finally happy with its position, you can keyframe it again and basically repeat the same steps that we've done for our first animation. After some final tweaks, you'll have an animation that looks just like this. If you're ready to learn Blender and want to join a community of like-minded people, check out the link in the description. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next one.